that some of you have logged in. There are a few people on the list of registrants that we're not seeing having logged in yet, so we're just going to give them a couple more minutes. Just wait for maybe 1 or 2 minutes and let a few more people trickle in, and then Joanne's going to start, and she's going to walk us through the sort of the base foundation presentation and talk us through that. Spend about half an hour or so on that, and then I'm going to walk us all through a little bit of a sort of basics, best practices on presenting, on delivering a PowerPoint presentation, and that might take around 20 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some questions. You all should see, if you're logged in, a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. You can type messages in there as we're going. If you want to ask Joanne or myself a question, you can type it in there at any time, and we'll see it. And then during sort of questions, Joanne might address some of them as she's going, or we might hold them and address them at the end. So you should see that chat pod in that box and be able to type in your questions there. If someone or a couple people don't mind just typing something in there right now to let us know you can hear us okay. Sometimes we have some issues with the mic, and we're not sure if everyone can hear properly. I can see a couple of people are typing now. Just let us know it's all good, and you can hear fine. Loud and clear. Thank you, Beth. Can hear. Thank you. Thanks, Joanne. Okay, we're just going to give it maybe 1 more minute for a few more people to jump in, and then we'll get started. All right, we're going to get started. So pass it over to Joanne.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. And sorry, I guess you could say good afternoon back, but don't worry about it. What I'm going to do today, because we don't have enough time to go through every single slide and all of the notes that go with the slides, because what I'm going to run you through quickly today is what we're calling the base presentation, the master presentation, where we can take slides and pull them out and add them in, and then you can hide slides that aren't relevant. Once we've got this all done, because I'm still working at building the note pages out, you'll actually have a set of speaking notes for every single slide that there is. And then we'll be able to actually adjust them for you. If you're doing a presentation just on the foundation, then you'll have that piece of the presentation. If you're doing a presentation, for example, just on social isolation, there will be a little bit about the foundation, and mostly it will be about social isolation and educating people about that. As we move forward, we're going to continue to build out these decks so that you hopefully at some point will feel comfortable enough speaking number of issues related to aging as we move forward. So without further ado, I'm going...
Actually, with ado.
Oh, with ado. Oh, okay.
Sorry, one quick reminder. I always forget to mention this. We're recording this webinar. So after it's done, we'll send everyone out a recording of it, so you'll have that, and we're also going to send obviously the 2 PowerPoint sets. So you'll have all of this stuff as assets after the webinar.
Great.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm basically going to start this as if I'm giving the presentation to you, but I will stop in different places to give you some ideas or tips or talk to you about what's there. So when we start, usually I start with introducing myself. As a staff person, of course, I talk a little bit about what my background is and why I'm knowledgeable in this particular area. I talk about the fact that I've worked for many organizations related to aging over the years and health-related conditions. And so I like to say I've got a wide variety of information and knowledge that brings to bear. So once you've introduced yourself, then I like to, hang on here. I'd like to basically start with, depending on, again, your audience, how many of you are members of the RTO? So I always like to start with some kind of question, just to get people to put up their hands and get a sense of who's in your audience. You may or may not know how many are members and how many aren't. And then I usually ask how many of you are familiar with the foundation and our work. And I always like to start with a little bit of background about the foundation, because people need to understand what it is we do and why it is that we're speaking to these particular issues. So we begin with that. So then I basically start and say, so who and what is the RTO ERO Foundation? Well, we're pleased to be the philanthropic partner of the RTO ERO. Established in 2011, the foundation was inspired by RTO ERO members' desire to improve the quality of life for aging adults. It's through the foundation that we've been able to better understand the aging process, to build awareness about how we can have a healthier and more connected aging experience, and advance research and innovative programming to combat social isolation in older adults. We are one of only a handful of foundations to invest exclusively in initiatives related to healthy and active aging. The foundation relies entirely on the voluntary donations of members, corporate partners, and others who care about improving our collective knowledge about aging. So, why do we exist? Well, can you imagine a Canada where seniors get the care and support they need, where, when, and how they need it? A Canada where we have a better understanding of the different dimensions of aging and more health professionals are trained to apply that knowledge? And can you envision a rising number of seniors who play an active role in the things that matter to them? Seniors who are part of daily life around their neighborhoods as volunteers, in the workplace, and across generations. That quality of life is the dream of the RTO ERO Foundation. So, hang on a sec here. Okay, so why does it matter? Well, it'll come as no surprise to know that seniors are a vital and growing force in Canada. In fact, for the first time, there are more Canadians aged 65 and over than there are under the age of 15. Our current seniors population, at a little over 14% of the population, is responsible for 50% of our national health care costs. And we're living much longer now, and with a wide variety of conditions affecting our ability to remain independent. By 2036, we will make up 25% of the population and account for 62% of our national health care costs. This will not be sustainable unless we redesign our healthcare system to better serve its aging population. So the question for us is what do we need to do to stay healthy and active for as long as possible? The research we fund is helping us better understand the needs of the older population and what can be done to improve our quality of the aging journey. And I've just got a couple slides backwards, so I'm going to go back up here. So what do we do? Hang on, I'll find it. Okay. So what exactly does the RTO ERO Foundation do? Well, our primary purpose is to fund geriatric and gerontology research, including the funding of our RTO ERO Chair in Geriatric Medicine, which I will speak to in a few minutes. We have provided close to $3 million in research grants to a total of 16 organizations across Ontario and BC. Through our granting program, we also support the training of health and social care providers in best practices for the care of older adults. But unlike most granting organizations, we are also creating a knowledge network of researchers, educators, and innovators who focus on the care of older adults. This enables us to have a deeper understanding of aging-related issues that are being addressed in the universities, colleges, and in the community. We facilitate the sharing of knowledge between researchers and community activators to bring research to life for seniors now. And through our research partners, we are also able to provide evidence of effective approaches to address key gaps in aging-related research, education, and programming, informing the work of the RTO ERO advocacy activities. We raise awareness among RTO ERO members and others about what we can all do to improve our own aging journey and that of our children and grandchildren. And as part of that, we focus on raising awareness broadly about the risks and the impact on the quality of life of older Canadians. And just so you know, Mike loaded one of the presentations that isn't the final one, so if I do a little jiggling back and forth, please forgive me. It'll be correct when we send it out to you. So here are the sad facts. Geriatrics and gerontology among the most chronically underfunded areas of research in Canada. A definition of each actually might be helpful. Geriatrics is a medical specialty focused on care and treatment of older persons. There is currently only one geriatrician for every 15,000 seniors in Canada, and that means poorer health outcomes for seniors, increasing the burden on individuals, families, institutions, and communities. And I'm just going to skip the rest. I define gerontology, and then we move on to talk a little bit more about the programs that we're funding. So I am watching the clock because there's a lot to go through. In this particular area, we are going to be talking about our grants, and I'm going to skip through this other than just to show you a couple of examples. There will be a slide for each and every grant that we have provided, with a couple of slides for Dr. Rochon, because of course that is our endowed chair, and we want to make sure we do focus on that as well. But each of our grants will have a slide that will have a photograph on it relevant to the grant, and we'll do what I basically call what so what. So what did we fund and what came out of it? So not only are we going to describe to you what the grants are, but we're going to let you know what the results of that research, where we have it, if there's toolkits that have been developed, if there's conferences that have been attended to train others, then that will all be highlighted in those. And one of the things you'll be able to do is to pull out grants that are more relevant to your audience and then hide the balance. So we're just going to skip through some of those particular ones. We got that. We do talk about, we have a slide that speaks to our annual grant program and how we actually go about deciding on the grants that we fund. So again, we'll have notes for that. And then again, one example of a grant, another example of a grant, and we will have those available for you in the next couple of weeks. So I'd like just to move on to the part of the deck here that addresses social isolation. So first of all, we want to be able to define social isolation. And I'm just looking back at my notes here. So social isolation is often confused with loneliness, but it's different. Social isolation is a physical state and involves limited contact with seniors, few social roles, and an absence of mutual rewarding relationships. Loneliness, on the other hand, is an emotional state. It is sadness that's felt by someone because they do not have any true friends or do not have anyone to talk to. You can be lonely in a crowd. You can have many friends, but deep down, underneath, you still have a sense of loneliness. Loneliness and isolation do often, but not necessarily, go hand in hand. One can lead to the other and vice versa. So research is telling us quite a bit about this issue. First of all, we know that in Canadians over the age of 65, 19% of them felt isolated. 24% wish they could participate in more social activities, and 30% are at risk of becoming socially isolated. Research has also told us that social connectedness has proven to be vital to seniors' health and well-being. Those with close connections and relationships tend to cope better with health conditions and experience fewer mental health issues such as depression. Social isolation can cause physical risk and put seniors at increased risk of elder abuse. So why is this issue so important? Well, recent studies have shown that social isolation is 2 times more deadly than obesity is, leading to diabetes. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my remote here. Okay. And social isolation increases your chances of early death, similar to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And social isolation increases your risk of developing dementia by 64%. So social isolation is in fact becoming the #1 emerging issue for Canadian seniors. Skip through that. Okay, there are many contributing factors to for someone to become socially isolated, and I'd like to just run through a few of them, and I'm probably not going to do them all, recognizing our time. I'll see how we go, but you can get a feel for how we fill in information that isn't sitting on the screen, but is in our notes to be able to speak to these issues. So the loss of a spouse or partner can have a devastating effect on a surviving person. The sense of loss and grief is natural, but if allowed to go on too long, it can result in severe depression, also leading to isolation. Sometimes with the loss of a partner, there's also a loss of income. And of course, that can become very isolating in and of itself. And as many of you may have already experienced, if you've lost a partner, the confusion and stress that comes with the sheer volume of decisions and paperwork can lead to depression and ultimately to becoming isolated. Retirement. You spend your life with coworkers every day, and often they're a part of your social circle. You have common interests and you interact every day. But when you retire, you're no longer part of that group. And unless you keep up with friendships with some of them, you eventually will lose contact. You may also lose a sense of purpose because you have a lot more time on your hands, and this can also lead to depression. Sensory loss is also an issue. If you're suffering from reduced hearing or a loss of sight, you may feel reluctant to engage socially. Even a loss of taste can lead to less enjoyment when sharing meals with your friends. Sorry, just a slight interruption in the room here. Incontinence. So many of us don't like to think about it, but in one study, almost 75% of respondents reported that day-to-day activities have been modified at least a little because of urine leakage. Now, an optional thing you might say is, when you think about it, that's 3 out of every 4 of us in this room are dealing with some level of incontinence. So you can easily see this in practice when you go into the drugstore and see aisles full of Depends rather than Huggies. This can lead to decreased confidence when going out. Our grant to the University of British Columbia is actually creating a self-help tool that will help seniors better manage their incontinence. Relocation or loss of friends can be an issue as well, and loss of a driver's license. This can be one of the most distressing risks to become socially isolated because it can lead to a lack of willingness to try public transit or other alternatives. And that loss of independence that comes with the loss of a driver's license can really be devastating, and particularly for men who have really relied on the car for their getting out and getting socially involved. Okay, before we go to there, I just want to mention I've got one more that isn't in this particular slide deck, being a caregiver. So how many of you have been or are caregivers to a spouse, a parent, or another older adult? Well, caregiving can be all-consuming and can literally take over a person's life. Cut off from social connections, a caregiver can become more isolated and lonelier, leading also to depression. The Foundation will focus on this issue in greater detail in the coming months. So we talk about fear. You know what? As you get much older, especially if you're a frail elderly person, there is great fear to getting out of your house, a fear of falling, a fear of getting on a bus, especially if you've been driving most of your life and you really don't know what the TTC or the public transit is, what senior services are available. Those are all things that keep people in their homes. Fear of dealing with strangers and new experiences. If you're an extrovert, that might not be a problem. If you're an introvert, it can literally be debilitating. And of course, things like falling down, being knocked down, being robbed, these are all things that can focus people and make them want to stay indoors. So remember, an individual who is socially isolated lacks a sense of belonging, engagement with others, fulfilling and quality relationships, and has a minimal number of social engagements. So how are we going to move forward in addressing this and in actually making sure that we don't personally become socially isolated in the process? And I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. One of the things that Mike will speak to you about when he talks about his tips for presenting is don't rush through it, which I'm doing for a lack of time, and just to give you a sense of the flow and what these notes will actually do to help you. So I apologize for breaking all of the rules and doing a good presentation.
That's perfect.
Okay, people can go, it's okay, Joanne. Oh, dear. So what can we do to avoid social isolation? Well, first of all, taking care of our health. Getting hearing and eyes are critical as you age, and I can speak to that for myself. Socially isolated individuals are at increased risk for the development of cardiovascular disease, infectious illnesses, cognitive deterioration, and mortality. And in fact, we do know, research tells us that staying engaged with children actually delays cognitive decline in older adults. So all of you have worked in the education sector, whether it's with young children or young adults, you're actually one step ahead of everybody else. And so staying involved with younger generations is also really important to ensure that you're being stimulated cognitively. And of course, eating lots of fruits and vegetables. Mom used to tell me this. It took me a long time to figure it out, but I have now, and I'm feeling much healthier about it. Get out of your home every day. If you've got a garden, spend time in it. Even if you can't do your gardening anymore, go out there, walk around the flowers, smell the roses, take a short walk, spend a few minutes in the sun, even in the middle of the winter. Step outside, just feel the sun on your face. And that really can help combat depression and lighten your spirit. And talk to people around you. If you've got a dog that you walk, a fabulous way of engaging with others, or people who are in line at the grocery store, at the drugstore, feel free to speak to people. For the most part, they're going to respond in a very positive way, and you're both going to have a positive experience because of it. So learn how to get around. We said what the fear is of public transit if you're not familiar with it. So plan for that before you actually become isolated or lose your license. Join the library. I don't think I fully appreciated until I became an older adult how valuable your library can be in taking courses, in connecting with other people. It's a great place to volunteer and just to be out among other people and be able to carry on a conversation. Your library is absolutely critical. Of course, volunteering. Many of you already volunteer. I'm happy to say you're volunteering for the foundation. So we're thrilled about that. And joining a choir or a class. There's nothing like lifelong learning to keep you cognitively stimulated and to get you out and to get you engaged with younger adults. So, as important as all of these ideas are, don't forget to take care of yourself. So I know this is an older lady. Most of you are much, much younger than this lady. However, the same goes. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. that you take care of your skin and your hair and your nails. Be certain that you do that on a day-to-day basis. Get dressed. It's so easy if you don't have any social engagement plans just to stay in your dressing gown, hang out at home. But you know what? You're going to start to be depressed by doing that. Get dressed, get your makeup on, for the guys too, and get out there and really be a part of your community. So I like to end with a quote, and this is one of the quotes that I thought would be quite relevant for this presentation. It's from Sophia Loren. "There is a fountain of youth. It is your mind, your talents, the creativity you bring to your life and the lives of people you love. When you learn to tap this resource, you will truly have defeated age." And so just briefly, some information at the end that talks about our Social Isolation Awareness Month, how to connect with us, and through social media as well. And those are all the connections. And then, of course, at that point, we do ask for questions. So we won't be doing that, I don't think, necessarily on the presentation itself. One of the things that we will be doing, so each of these slides, and we'll make sure they're properly ordered with the notes attached directly to the slide, which is a great way to keep it from being mixed up. We will provide that to you with the notes. You will be able to modify the notes. I have written them at this point, and maybe we might give you two versions, one that's simply point form, but what I've actually created at this point is what I've actually spoken to. So it's more sentences and lines. You will be able to use this in whatever way works best for you and has you feeling comfortable about the information that you're sharing. And I think my half hour's pretty much up.
Perfect.
So I'm going to leave the presentation at that for now and pass it over to Mike, who's going to talk to you about some tips on giving presentations.
Thank you. Before I start, does anyone have any questions for Joanne? Anything related to what she just walked through or anything you saw? Again, you can type a question in the chat box and we'll see it on this end. Maybe just wait for a couple seconds, see if anyone has a question. But again, you can enter your questions in the chat box at any time related to what Joanne's saying or what I'm saying, and we can have a couple minutes to address it when we get to the end. And of course, you can reach out to Joanne and or myself anytime by email or by phone or whatever when you have questions about any of this stuff.
Okay. So one of the questions, it's a very good question. What community groups do you recommend we speak to? I think as part of our process in supporting you, it would be useful for us to provide you with some ideas on that. Your local service groups are absolutely fabulous. You might go and speak at a community center or at a club. There are many, many community places where you would be able to basically go in and say, I'd like to do a session on social isolation, and of course you're going to talk about the foundation when you're doing that. So we will also add that and give you some ideas on how you can connect with those groups in your local community.
Great. Okay, thanks, Joanne. So I'm going to get started on a separate presentation. Close this one. Just bear with me for 1 minute. Yep. Okay, and again, as was the case with Joanne, if anyone has any questions or there's anything you're confused about or want me to slow down or explain something again, just type a comment in the chat box. And again, all this stuff is being recorded and we'll send all this stuff out to everybody after we're done. So I wanted to spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes just walking through some best practices around presenting, just sort of speaking, delivering a PowerPoint, speaking in front of a crowd. You know, I'm sure a lot of this will seem pretty obvious and intuitive, especially to a group of teachers who spent their career speaking in front of groups of people. But But it's always kind of amazing to see how many people who have spent tons of time presenting and speaking still kind of forget to do things, or there's things that slip in terms of preparation. Or so the idea of this is really to just have almost like a checklist, right? So if you are prepping for a presentation, you can run through this. Hopefully this acts as a bit of a cheat sheet or a reference for you to make sure you've sort of crossed all the I's and dotted the T's, as they say. So I just wanted to start with a quote here. This is a quote related to public speaking, from Alexander Gregg, who is an Episcopal clergyman from the U.S., who had a lot of great quotes, actually, and a lot related to speaking. There are 3 things to aim at in public speaking. First, to get into your subject. Then to get your subject into yourself. And lastly, to get your subject into the heart of your audience. There's going to be a couple of quotes in here, and I'm going to end on another quote that's similar to this one, in that the goal of all of this has to be about inspiring people, right? It's about informing and presenting information, but really ultimately it's about inspiring people, especially in this case, to take action and get involved. So it's really about the audience. It really is. So best practices. There's about, I think, 8 or 9 in here. So we'll start with rehearsal. This is probably the most important principle. Again, seems pretty obvious. But it is surprising how many people fail to rehearse or fail to rehearse enough when they're preparing for a presentation. So just a couple of tips here. I always recommend, and I always practice, running through my presentation with a timer. It adds a little bit of pressure to your rehearsal, which is a good thing, but it really helps you figure out if your timing is correct. Is one of the things I tend to stress out. Am I going to go long? Am I going to be too short? Do I have enough content? So running through it with a timer multiple times really helps you kind of refine things, refine your pace, figure out where you tend to get stuck. You'll tend to get stuck or ramble or sort of go off on a tangent in the same place. And so especially when you're doing it with a timer, you'll realize you've now been on the same slide for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, which is way too long, and you need to kind of correct that. So also make sure you have speaking notes and have them in front of you. I do know a lot of people who speak without notes, and I think that's a talent. Most people need to create some notes, and it's great to have them in front of you, but do not read them. That should go without saying, but again, we've all been sat through presentations or speeches where the person gets up and kind of puts their head down and is like reading, and it's really not fun to experience. So please be careful not to rely too much on your notes. What I find about myself personally is that actually the act of making the notes, I know everyone kind of learns in different ways. I forget the name of it, but there's like a name for like actually writing, and that kind of embeds it in your brain even more than hearing or seeing it. I'm certainly that kind of learner. So I find that when I make the notes, it just embeds the information in my brain, and then I actually don't need the notes. So practice that. And also, I recommend rehearsing standing up. You don't have to do it every time, but if you're running your speech 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 times or however many times you want to do it, do most of it standing up. It just kind of gets your energy level to where it should be. It's kind of hard, if not impossible, to rehearse properly when you're like sitting in the backyard in a Muskoka chair with a beer in your hand. It's just not great rehearsal. So I always rehearse standing up. The second tip or best practice is around personalizing your presentation. Here's another quote. This is from Nicholas Bootsman, who's an author and a speaker, or is known for that. I think he's based out of Toronto, actually. It's much easier to be convincing if you care about your topic. Figure out what's important to you about your message and speak from the heart. So passion and enthusiasm is really the best way to deliver an interesting and compelling speech, is to be passionate and be enthusiastic. But it also, that's your personality, right? I mean, being up there and just kind of reading and running through the content, that's not you. The more passion and enthusiasm and personality you can inject, the more people will enjoy your presentation. Joanne referred to this already, but we've tried to design the presentation to be something that you can inject your own anecdotes and personal stories in. So if and when you're preparing for a presentation, figure out where those can go. Figure out where you can personalize it with some stories that are unique to you, that are poignant, that are insightful in some way. A lot of, I think, really effective speakers open with a story. You always want to open strong, and telling a story or an anecdote, something personal and unique, is a great way to start a presentation. So consider that. In terms of your tone and your personality when you're presenting, try to find a good mix of, you want to be formal, you obviously don't want to be too casual and laid back. You're a guest, you've been invited there because you are an expert in this area, you're representing the foundation and you're representing the cause. So you want to be formal to some degree, but not to the extent that you're cold and unapproachable. So everyone's got their own personal mix of formal and approachability, and so find that, figure out what that tone and personality is. Embrace mistakes. Obviously everybody's human. I find that when somebody delivers a presentation that's too perfect, it kind of indicates that they've done it maybe too many times and they're kind of doing it by rote, like by memory, and it gets a bit cold. So obviously you shouldn't make mistakes on purpose, but when you do, it actually adds some personality, and people see that you're human and they connect and they empathize with you, and no one's going to be too hard on you. So embrace those mistakes, learn from them, and obviously be yourself when you're speaking. Okay, watching the clock. This is a big one. Joanne and I are always practicing this and kind of trying to keep each other in check. It's very easy when you're usually from like the anxiety and you're kind of stressed out about what you're doing to forget that you are on a timer, and you should be sort of watching the clock, at least checking the clock every 5 minutes or so. So that's why I practice with a timer, because I get used to speaking and checking the clock at the same time. So a couple of tips here around time. Don't run long. Again, this is pretty obvious to say, but somebody has spent some time to sort of craft this schedule, and you may only have 10 or 15 minutes, you might have an hour, like whatever you have, be respectful of that schedule. Don't run long. What I do is I plan a few slides in the presentation, somewhere near the middle or even near the end, that you could skip over. Like they're not completely essential, they're nice to have slides, but not must-have slides. So if you have the time, you can talk through them, but if you don't and you find you're running long, or somebody's giving you the hook from side stage, you can skip over those, and you can mention them. You can say, I'm just going to skip over these quickly just to be respectful of time. We can come back to this or talk about it in the Q&A or something like that. But plan which slides you can skip over. Do not sacrifice the Q&A. I think a lot of people tend to see that Q&A as sort of like a nice to have little thing at the end, but no one's going to ask questions anyway. So if you're running long, you can just run into the Q&A. If you have 30 minutes to speak and then 15 minutes for Q&A, and you find yourself running long, a lot of people go, well, I can just talk for 45 minutes because that's the time I've been allotted. Don't do that. Really recommend against that. The Q&A, that's your opportunity to engage with the audience. It's their opportunity to engage with your content, open up a conversation. It's in some ways the most important part of the presentation. So it is better to cut yourself off, cut some slides if you have to, but still leave time for the Q&A, and the crowd will respect you for it. And decide ahead of time how you want to manage questions. So most people, I think, prefer to leave questions to the end. It's pretty cool and a lot more conversational if you can manage questions as you're speaking. It just makes things a lot more conversational and kind of laid back, but that makes it obviously quite difficult to manage time when you're taking questions. But it's up to you. If you like to take questions while you're speaking, go for it, and if not, take them at the end. But either way, let the crowd know when you start what the expectation is. They're not sticking their hands up while you're talking and you have to kind of ask them to put their hands down. Let them know, shoot questions at me as I go, or please hold your questions till the end, and we'll do it at the end. So the expectation is clear. Okay, managing your pace. This is also related, obviously, to timing. And this is hard. I find this hard, and most people find this hard, is speeding up when you're speaking. I saw something somewhere that statistically they have found that the average person, when they're speaking in front of other people, not a huge crowd, even just speaking in front of 5 or 6 or 10 people, and especially when they're speaking in front of a large crowd, will tend to speak 15 to 20% faster than they do naturally. So that's a considerable increase in pace. So knowing that, assume you're going to do something similar, be aware of that. Consciously slow yourself down And do this throughout the presentation. Even if you start slow, you'll have a tendency to kind of speed up as you go, and you get a little frantic, and it gets hard to follow. So every so often, check your pace, slow yourself down, even to the point that it feels a bit uncomfortable. If it feels a little bit uncomfortable, then you're probably speaking at a good pace. And pausing. I think this is something probably most or every teacher does really well and has been trained to do. The pauses are so important, and they help the crowd, the audience, sort of follow your story, right? I mean, I think of them short pauses and medium and long pauses as the sentences and the paragraph breaks and the chapters in a novel, right? Without them, it's just like, I don't know where we're at. I don't know when we're moving on to another thing. So, we like to add those pauses where we can to sort of put a period at the end of a point, or, a point you're trying to make, and a longer pause when you're shifting gears and switching to another topic, just so the crowd really can kind of follow your pace. All right, connecting with the audience. Here's a great quote from Ken Hamer, who is, I don't know, was or is the head of research at AT&T, which seems like a sort of a random source to be pulling a quote from, but he was really well known as a great presenter, and he had a lot of good quotes and insight on presenting. And I love this quote: "Designing a presentation without an audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern." So some tips on connecting with the audience. Again, some pretty intuitive stuff here, but very easy to forget when you're nervous. Smiling, making eye contact with the crowd, looking around. Don't get stuck focusing on one person or one part of the room. Look around. These are the things that make you seem relaxed, even if you're not, and just kind of let people know that you're a human. You should be at least giving the impression that you're having fun up there. So smile and eye contact. Read the response of the crowd. This is also hard to do. I'm not an expert at it. I've tried to get better at it, but try to read how they're reacting, and then you react accordingly. And this basically means, if you can tell that you're losing them, and you can usually tell, through people's eye contact, or people start, God forbid, picking up their phones and chit-chatting with each other, as rude as that might be, that means you've lost them. And so react accordingly. That means you might need to speed up a bit. You might need to kind of skip through a couple of slides to get to your more compelling content if you have something that you think is a little more interesting coming up. And conversely, if you find that people are really into what you're saying, like they're just hanging on every word and they seem very engaged, then slow down and spend a little more time with that content. Put yourself in the audience. Again, it's a hard thing to do, but try to, at least at one or 2 points while you're speaking, just try to flip it and imagine that you're sitting in the crowd, and imagine that, are you enjoying this? Are you having fun? Because if you're not getting something out of it, you're not entertained, you're not engaged, then something's gone wrong. So try to put yourself in their shoes. And express gratitude. I'm always a bit surprised how many people forget to do this. I think it's nerves again, is you just kind of, a lot of people just want it to be done, and they're sort of anxious to get off stage, and they finish their slide, take a few questions, and sort of disappear. And you need to say thank you. I mean, you're there as a guest. You've probably been invited there. So, thanks so much for having me, and it's been great to be here. Let people know that you're grateful for the opportunity and that you had a good time. Okay, managing anxiety. This is maybe the biggest one. I forget what the statistic is around public speaking, but I think it's like, the #1 most common fear in all people. It's just such a common anxiety. I think I read 75% of people have sort of moderate to severe anxiety when it comes to speaking in front of a crowd. So it is worth at least knowing that it's not just you, that everyone has this issue, and there are a couple little tricks you can try and to manage it. I love this quote from Mark Twain. "There are only 2 types of speakers in the world. 1, the nervous, and 2, liars." That kind of says what I was just saying in a much more poetic way. So managing anxiety. Preparation and rehearsal. We talked at the very beginning about prep and rehearsal as being the most important thing. It is certainly the most important thing, not just for delivering a great speech, but for managing your anxiety. If you haven't prepped, if you feel hesitant about the content, if you know you're going to screw up because you just haven't done it before, you're going to be a lot more anxious than if you've gone through the speech a number of times and you've got your flow and you know the content and you've even memorized some of it. So prep and rehearsal do wonders, obviously, for anxiety. Anxious reappraisal. This is something I only recently learned about, and I'm sure some people listening today are aware of this, maybe know a lot about it, but this is the phenomenon, I think, sort of psychologically and physiologically, that they've found that the way the body responds, the brain chemistry, the sort of body response to anxiety and to excitement are essentially identical. So the sweaty palms and the shaky hands and all the stuff that goes on with dopamine and brain chemistry, all of that stuff is essentially identical if you're excited or nervous. The only difference is the expected outcome being positive or negative. So I'm certainly no expert in this, but just knowing it I find kind of helpful. I think a lot of public speakers have done a lot of training and probably a lot of therapy to master this, so I wouldn't expect anyone to just be able to turn their nervousness into excitement. But just knowing that essentially they are the same thing, to me at least, helps kind of calm me a little bit. I try to remember that we're on the same side, meaning you as a speaker and the audience. You've been invited there because people want to hear you speak. Presumably everyone, if not most people in the crowd, are interested in what you have to say. They want you to succeed. They want you to have fun. They want to have fun. They want to learn something. So this is not like, I've done a lot of business pitching in sort of previous careers, and that's the opposite of this. That's you being judged against other organizations who are competing for the same thing. That's kind of brutal. In this case, you and the crowd are on the same side. They want the best for you, and vice versa. So just keep that in mind. And presenting, just keep doing it, whether it's rehearsal or doing it for small crowds, doing it for large crowds. The more you do it, the easier it gets. Okay, some sort of, I guess, logistical stuff here, but it's very important. And again, I think teachers are pretty good with this stuff in terms of staying organized and sort of being respectful of the situation and the timing and all of the logistics that go into a presentation. Arrive early. This is just about sort of your tech prep. Obviously, the worst thing for anxiety and nerves, if you're prone to that, is running late. It's walking into the room 2 minutes before you have to go on stage, and it's the worst thing you could do for yourself and everyone who's organizing the event. So get there early, like even way too early. I don't think you can be too early for these things. If you're using a PowerPoint, if you're doing a presentation like this or like what Joanne did earlier, get it up on the screen. If you're running it off a laptop, your host has some computer most of the time, and you're going to be running a presentation, maybe off your own machine, maybe off the host's machine. But the second point here is really important to remember. Often you might be in a situation where you're bringing the presentation on you have the PowerPoint on a USB stick, like a little key drive. It's not reliable to run the presentation from that. What you need to do is plug that drive into the computer you'll be using and download it or move it from that key drive onto the machine. It should be on the desktop of the machine you're using, and you should run it from there. If you run a PowerPoint from a key drive, it can slow down and it can even freeze, and that's brutal. So make sure, again, you leave yourself enough time. These presentations are fairly big. They're kind of slow to load. Move it from your key drive onto the desktop of the computer you're using and run it from there. Once you've got it set up, make sure it looks good on screen. Your hosts or whoever's there will help you with this. Always click through the entire presentation one time from the beginning slide to the end, just to make sure everything's in place, everything looks good. Basic stuff like your microphone, right? Like, it's how many times have we seen someone get up to speak and they start speaking and the mic's not on, and they kind of fumble looking for the on switch and they can't find it, and then someone from off stage, like, it's terrible. So if you're using a microphone, just make sure you at least know how to turn it on and off. And figure out where you're going to be standing, if you're going to be behind a podium, if you like a podium or not, where you'll be in the room. Don't be standing right in front of a screen. All those basics, just figure that stuff out ahead of time so you don't have to worry about it. And all of that requires being there a little bit early. This is just something called Know Your Plan B. This is pretty basic. And this is a great quote from Dennis Waitley. Said, I think this is a pretty famous quote. A lot of people have heard this. Expect the best, plan for the worst, and prepare to be surprised. So assume that everything will go swimmingly, but you never know, right? So have a backup plan in the worst case scenario, which is, and this has happened to me a couple of times, and we know some people who it's happened to, when you are expected to do a PowerPoint presentation and the tech just completely fails. So you got there early, you did all the things you're supposed to do, and something just completely fails, and you have to just still present. I mean, the worst thing you could do is just not present at all. So what you need to have is bring with you a printed copy of the presentation. The slide and the notes can all be printed on one a sheet in front of you, so at least you have it and you can still deliver it. It might not be as engaging or interesting without the PowerPoint, but I think people will kind of love and respect you for still being able to come through when the tech fails. So make sure you have a copy of the presentation in front of you and have a few questions prepared, just in case the audience doesn't have any in the Q&A, right? Like, rather than it just being radio silence, you want to have something like, if there's no question, well, people often ask me this, or a question we often get about social isolation is, right? So at least you have something so it's not uncomfortable when there are no questions. Have a few in your back pocket. And this is our last best practice, is the Q&A. So as I mentioned earlier, the Q&A is really important. It in some, I think a lot of people would say it's maybe the most important part of a presentation, or it certainly can be. So respect the Q&A. Make sure you leave enough time for discussion. I mentioned that earlier. Make it conversational. This is the chance you have to interact, to have people interact with you, to ask you questions. Plan a response, like a sort of a stock response for the questions that you're unable to answer. It's totally fine to say something like, I don't have an answer for that right now, but I'll get in touch with the foundation staff and I'll get back to you. Come and see me afterwards. I'll get your email address. Whatever. Just have that response planned so you know what to say. And the last point is, don't be afraid to take things offline. We'll often find, and we've all been in this situation where you have a question to ask in the Q&A, or other people do, but the presenter has kind of got into a one-on-one discussion with someone. Someone's asked a kind of a complex question, and they answer it, and then they ask a supplementary question, and they kind of go off on a tangent. It turns into a bit of a debate. It might be a really interesting and legitimate discussion, but that's really eating into time that other people want to have questions. So don't be afraid. Your host, if you have one for an event, will often help with this. But be prepared to, if one question goes on for more than a couple of minutes, is to say, this is a great conversation. Let's take this offline. I want to make sure there's time for as many people as possible to ask some questions. Come up and see me later. We'll talk some more about it. So don't be afraid to do something like that and have that response prepared. And just going to close with a quote from William Arthur Ward related to all of this, which is about, like I said at the beginning, inspiring people. The mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, the great teacher inspires. So, if we're not inspiring people through our speaking and through our presentations and through our information sharing, it's kind of for naught. So keep that in mind, and we're trying to inspire people and have fun doing it. So that's it for this best practices presentation. We've got 5 minutes or so. If anyone does have questions about what I just ran through, or again going back to what Joanne ran through, please type it in the chat box. We'll spend a few minutes on questions. You can reach out to me. My email address is right there on screen, so if anyone who doesn't have it, please reach out to me by email, or you're always free to reach out to Joanne and ask us questions about this stuff. I think Joanne mentioned at the beginning, this is a bit of it's a work in progress for us. We're continuing to work on that foundation sort of base deck. I am happy to sort of continue to evolve this deck. If anyone has suggestions or anything like that, happy to continue working on them. So Again, after this, we're going to send these out, the presentations, and we're going to send out the recording of this hour webinar. I can see someone's typing a question, so we'll wait for that. I'm going to pop a little bit, just like a 2-question survey on screen. Just take a second and please fill in the survey. It's 2 questions. Did you find it useful, and do you have any suggestions? That just helps us learn and continue to evolve these sort of online webinars so that we can make them better. Anything to add?
No, I don't think
No?
so.
Okay.
Other than, as I say, what you may find that I've kind of written out my notes because I wanted to be able to share with you what I would actually say in a presentation. You may find it much easier just to use the bullet points and speak to it yourself. So we will provide you with both. And we'll be able to modify these for you as well. If you've got a specific audience, that would be great. Okay, just trying to read that. Speaking of eyesight, what if a community group like Rotary says, what's this got to do with us? This is all about building awareness. So the social isolation slide deck is really about educating and building awareness about this issue and sharing with people ideas on what they can do to prevent it for themselves or for other people as well. So I think that, sorry, tune-up session mid-fall, absolutely, we'll do that. Yeah, so certainly what you do want to do is relate what you're doing to the group that you're speaking to. So if it's the Rotary Club, usually Rotary will have business people, probably mostly in the boomer population. One of the pieces that we're also going to add to the master slide deck is to speak to people who are younger, who may have parents or other relatives that are in this situation, and tips on how they can identify this in others and support those people as well. So you'll see much more as we move forward, and we'll be able then to refine those depending on the audience that you're actually dealing with. But we can also give you some wording for if you want to make a call to, say, Rotary. They basically have somebody usually who's booking speakers. We'll make sure that we're giving you some key messages on why they might want to hear from you and how it will benefit their membership as well. Do you want me to read that one? Please.
Okay, there's a comment that says, it would be helpful for you to approach the provincial offices of various service organizations to make them aware of us. It can trickle down to the locals and help to open the door for us.
Really great idea. Some of them are managed through their provincial organizations, a few aren't, so we'll figure that out and let you know what we can do to support that on our end as well. So if there are no other questions, and again, if you've got a question that you think of later on, please feel free to shoot it through to Mike, Deanna, or myself. This is really all about supporting you, encouraging you, and getting out and speaking within your community about the great work that the foundation does, but also making sure that you're giving value to those people that you're speaking to as well. So always good to make sure you've got a benefit for them, as well as speaking about what great work the foundation does and inviting people to join us through their donations and continuing to share the information that we're sharing as well.
There's maybe one more.
Okay.
Maybe.
Maybe. Or
I can
maybe
see when someone's typing, so we just have to wait for the question to come through. But yeah, as Joanne said, I mean, we hope that you're all finding this helpful. These webinars or trainings using this format are, not difficult for us to organize and deliver. So yeah, the comment about doing a tune-up in the fall, we can totally do this again. Especially as the deck continues and the presentation continues to evolve and there's more content in there, happy to run through it or parts of it or whatever. And again, this is recorded. So the idea of the recording is that you'll be able to sort of listen back to it again, kind of get a sense for Joanne's flow and her tone and how she does stuff, if that's helpful. And then also obviously listen to the best practices again.
And we're also here to help you if you want to actually practice a presentation with one of us. Certainly we can do that on the phone, or if you're not too far away, we can always connect directly with you. But we're here to support you in any way that we can, and hope that you can see your way to being able to get out into your community and share the great work that we're all doing thanks to the foundation and to the support of our donors.
Great. Okay, we're going to close it up. It's 4 o'clock. So with one thing maybe coming in. Yes? No?
Beth, you gave up?
Just feel free to shoot us an email.
Hang on.
No, where is it?
Okay, Beth, let us know if you've changed your mind.
Email Joanne or myself with any other questions, and we're happy to answer.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks everyone.
And we'll talk again soon. Take care and have a great long weekend. Oh, did you cut me off?